breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence barrister, not your usual pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Jay Merchant. Our episodes are every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains description of heinous murder, defilement of corpse, and serial killer tendencies. Viewer discretion is advised.
Well, good morning, Jay.
Good morning.
For our regular listeners, you're probably a little bit of a surprise sitting here with me.
I could be.
Yes,
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, hoping it's a good thing. We have some news from the podcast. So our original host, Joe Crowley, has left the building.
Yes.
Yes, he has been appointed as a judge in the National and Supreme Courts of Papua New Guinea.
Oh, that's awesome. Fantastic. Congrats.
Very big congratulations to Joe. He will be very missed. But to take his place, we have Jay Merchant. So I would like to welcome you to the pod. And
Thank you.
I thought maybe you should introduce yourself to our listeners.
I've got a checkered past. I come from Canada originally. Canada's not for sale, Donald Trump. But you know, I started in oil and gas back in Canada, and then in 2010 decided to move to Australia. I play a unique winter sport and was recruited, so I received a visa to come over and curl for Australia instead of Canada.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Curling,
yeah, ice.
You may need to explain to
Lawn
non-Canadians.
bowls, yeah, lawn bowls on ice with brooms, and it's a great sport. It's an Olympic sport.
I have seen photos of you doing your curling.
Okay.
It does look quite fun.
It is.
And did you do well?
I did all right. I've done everything but the Olympics. So,
Well, that's pretty impressive.
well, I do what I can.
So you came here on a sports visa and then what?
I had 2 years before I could officially compete for Australia. So I decided to go to law school. I went to Bond University.
Excellent.
You know, the time frames just fit out perfectly. And after law school, I needed to find a job.
Nice.
And I took a unusual approach and went to the Queensland Police Service Academy. So I became a police officer.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
I did. It was intense and exciting at the same time. The stories that I have, they range from, like I said, intense and exciting, and some not so exciting.
We might be able to share some of those.
Yeah.
Our listeners down the track.
Down the track, for sure.
And so then after you had been at the police, what did you do?
Yes. So I spent a year on the road. I was patrolling in Eagleby, Beenleigh, Logan Central.
Busy little
Yeah, there's a
spot.
lot of activity there.
Yes.
But I had a great time. There's no better way to learn policing than to be in the deep end.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with a law degree in the police service, you progress very quickly.
Right.
And so I went into legal division, police prosecutions, did some time at Southport. And from there, I had a meteoric rise up to officer in charge of police prosecutions in Mackay Whitsundays.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that was the best job
Beautiful
ever.
area.
Yes,
Yes. And now I know you because we work together.
we do.
Yes. So you're obviously teaching law,
I am.
but you also practice?
I do. So I have barristers' chambers in Brisbane. So I have a practice in domestic violence, some migration appeals, crime. Disciplinary proceedings are coming up more and more.
Right.
So bodies, so police, etc., that are having issues internally will look for outside assistance.
And so do you do defense work now?
I do. So I still I do defense work, and occasionally when the director of public prosecutions requires someone, I will step in if they ask.
I'll have to try and get past the fact you've moved to the dark side.
Hey, I sit on both sides of the bar table.
Well, I am very pleased
Thank you.
to welcome you. So we are just continuing on with our usual format. We'll be recording an episode each week that we tell each other. And today it's my turn.
Yes.
So if you're ready to get started? Was there anything else?
No, I'm just excited to be here, and I look forward to diving into whatever it is we're going to be diving into this week.
All right. So today I am actually going to tell you about Catherine Knight, who has been called Australia's Hannibal Lector.
Really?
Yes. And I think for some of our younger listeners, maybe they're not as familiar with who Hannibal Lecter is, but I recommend everyone go and watch Silence of the Lambs, which is an amazing movie. But Hannibal Lecter was a cannibalistic killer.
Yes.
Yes. So Catherine Knight wasn't technically a cannibal.
Okay.
But you will see the parallels
All right.
as we go through.
Technically not a cannibal. Let's do it.
Yeah. So this episode was actually requested by 2 different listeners amongst the many comments we get. I try and see what listeners want to hear.
Yes.
And I have known about this case for a long time.
Yeah.
And it does fascinate me in a really horrible way because honestly, I say to my students all of the time, when we learn criminal law, you learn about the worst things that people will do to each other. And Catherine Knight is at the top of that list. Yes. Interestingly, her case has been in the media a little bit this year, even though it's quite old now because it's been 25 years since she was convicted and punished.
Right.
And in fact, a former detective, a fellow called Luke Taylor, spoke out in the last year or so about Knight. And so I also want to talk about some of the comments the police in this case have said. So he said, "She is the embodiment of basic instinct fame, maternal instincts and stereotyped femininity at loggerheads with a violent maleness that was born from an abusive childhood."
There's a lot in there.
I know. He said, "What scares and interests so many Australians was reconciling so many male attributes to a female, abusive, domineering, abattoir worker, knife expert, outspoken. There were so many warning signs, yet none were heeded." So I put that at the front so that we can think about those comments as we go through. But I do feel a bit concerned about that comment.
Yeah, I mean, look, I come from a very small town. I come from a farming rural area, and everybody works on the farm. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. So certainly there's the equality side of things that immediately comes to mind, and who's perpetrating these sorts of criminal activities.
And I think despite, as listeners would know, despite the many conversations we have in this podcast about toxic masculinity and the push at the moment for women to take a more traditional role in the home and men to be the providers, I think it's wrong to think that there are male attributes that are typical of a criminal and that it's unusual for a female to have those, because I think they're universal.
I think they're becoming more universal. But I mean, even, we talked about Hannibal Lecter in this case being 25. You look at those like Eileen Wuornos, for instance, in the United States, where she brutally murdered men in a way that would previously be considered something that a man would do.
Interesting. All right. So let's have a little look at this. So I've taken all of this information from the sentencing judgment.
Yes.
Justice Barry O'Keefe was the sentencing judge. So this case took place in February 2001, and it was a charge of murder for Catherine Knight against her partner, John Price, also known as Pricey. She had originally pleaded not guilty. The matter was set down for trial. Her counsel got sick, so it got adjourned and set for another trial. But just before that, she gave an indication that she wanted to plead guilty. Now, the judge in this case was very wary about that offer to plead because of the heinous nature of the crime. And so he would not accept a plea until there had been thorough psychiatric evaluations done to ensure that she was aware of what pleading guilty would mean and what the consequences of that plea would be.
Yeah, I mean, I was immediately thinking, from your description that there might be a mental health component to this matter.
So part of the sentencing judgment looked at all of those psychiatric evaluations to see if she did have some kind of mental illness which would need to be taken into account in terms of whatever sentence she got.
Right.
Turns out no, but we'll get to that. The other thing was that when it was still listed for trial and they were looking at impaneling the jury, they had to have a real discussion with the jurors to warn them of the heinous nature of the crime and the types of graphic, gruesome evidence that they would be hearing. And so they were given an opportunity to ask to be excused on that basis before any evidence had even been heard, which is very unusual.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it from a prejudicial side of things that, depending on the graphic images, there might be an element there that creeps in. So it's an interesting.
But wouldn't that be the case for any murder?
Certainly, and I hope we get into what she actually did.
Oh, we do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because, somebody like an Eileen Wuornos who shoots someone, that's part and parcel with a murder.
Mm.
It depends how the lengths go. And I know there have been barristers that have attempted to remove graphic images based off of the prejudicial nature.
But they usually get let in.
They do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we did do a trigger warning, but I think I do need to be very clear. We're going to hear some really
I like it.
Gross information.
Let's do it.
All right. But so I thought I'd start with who Catherine Knight was.
Sure.
Okay. So she was one of 8 children, 6 of whom were boys, and she had a twin sister. So there were 6 boys and the twin girls.
2 girls, yeah.
And this information came from the many interviews she had with psychiatrists. And so, it's her version, but she didn't give that evidence in court. It just came from the reports. She said when she was only about 1 or 2 years old, one of her brothers had sexually abused her. She also...
So she remembered when she was 1 or 2 that her... Okay.
She also had a suggestion that her father may have sexually abused her, although some articles I read said she's later claimed he never did anything to her, but the psychiatrists had that.
Right.
The doctors were doubtful about the truth of these matters. There was no corroborating reports or accounts or evidence.
But you get that in all these psychological and psychiatric reports. I mean, it is self-reporting, so that should be somewhat expected.
And also, we know the nature of sex offences is that they are often unreported.
That's right.
Because of the nature. So I'm not discounting that it happened, but at school, classmates had varying memories of her. Some depicted her as a bully, prone to murderous rages when people crossed her, but others witnessed a diligent student who had won rewards for positive behaviour. So
in school, they came up with that conclusion already.
Well,
all right.
Apparently.
Objection.
She left school at 16 and nabbed what she referred to as her dream job in the abattoir. She had a bit of a fascination with knives. She soared through the ranks there, was gifted her own set of butcher knives.
Yeah, go to culinary school.
Which she actually kept on the wall above her bed, apparently. So that's an interesting little fact.
Yep.
And then she got older and started having some relationships. So she had a number of relationships. They're relevant because there are similar themes that run through them.
All right. A pattern of behavior type stuff. All right.
Yes. So her first husband was a fellow called David Kellett. So they got married in 1974. They had 2 children, and that ended about 10 years later. She said he physically abused her, he was unfaithful, and as a result, she'd suffered a nervous breakdown. But Kellett and all of her exes made a statement that denied any incidents of violence in their marriage. He said it was she who was unpredictably violent. He told of an event on their wedding night in which she choked him by grabbing his throat, saying it was because he fell asleep following 3 rounds of intercourse and therefore his performance was less than impressive.
After 3 rounds?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. He said that at a later time she attacked him with an iron, and on another occasion he had woken up to find her sitting on his chest holding a meat knife to his throat saying, "You see how easy this is?" While she was heavily pregnant, she burnt all of his clothing and shoes before hitting him across the back of the head with a frying pan, all because he had arrived home late from a darts competition where he'd made the finals.
Well, darts is like curling. It's important.
Very important.
It's very important.
So right from the start, we can see some anger issues.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, sure, self-reporting, but at least the gentleman had an opportunity to present their side as well.
Yes,
so
that's right. And I should say all of these partners made statements for the purposes of the court hearing, but none of them were cross-examined.
Yeah,
or anything.
no, that makes sense.
So that ended. Her next partner was another David Saunders. They commenced their relationship in 1987 and had one child together. She also told the doctors that he treated her badly and was violent to her. She recounted a time when he had kicked her in the stomach because she said he thought she was pregnant. When he did that, she said she went and got a knife and immediately went into their backyard and, as an act of revenge, cut the throat of his 8-week-old puppy while he was watching.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're taking it out on the dog.
Which I know that there are people who've died in this story, but that was one of the things that got me the most.
Absolutely.
During that relationship, she did take a drug overdose of sleeping tablets and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a short time.
Yes. She
had taken out a number of AVOs against him.
So she took AVOs against him?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And one of her daughters did say that he had been violent towards her. So he made a statement saying he hadn't kicked her. He claimed that he thought that although, there were some issues in the relationship, it was generally good.
Yeah.
I think that's a low bar. And he said that it was him who got assaulted in the relationship and told of her stabbing him in the right side of the stomach with a pair of scissors. And she had also cut up all of his clothes into little pieces.
And I can guarantee you that wasn't reported.
No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, we are talking 25 plus years ago, and I know we've come a long way with domestic violence since then. But this kind of thing, if we reversed the genders and there was a man doing this to a woman, we would be up in arms. This needs to be reported. And I think I want to make it clear. I think her conduct, while not typical of domestic violence dynamics, usually it is the man, absolutely is committed by women.
Oh, and I was just going to say it most certainly is. And we talked about the heinous murder, but also we've got to think about the dog as well.
Well, I know.
You see a little Vizsla and that's what pops into your head.
So sad. All right. So that relationship ended.
Okay.
She began a new relationship with a guy called John Chillingworth. We're up to 1990 now. They also had a son together. When speaking to doctors, she again claimed that he had been violent with her, assaulting her on many occasions, although, again, the doctors noted there were no available reports to support those claims.
Right.
He made a statement, said he was never violent to her apart from one occasion when she had snatched his glasses off his face and broke them in front of him. I don't know why.
I'm not sure. He
was admittedly an alcoholic during their relationship, but by the time he made the statement, he had given up alcohol and was a member of AA. So I don't know what the relevance of that was, but they noted it. He said that she had been spiteful and vindictive to him throughout the relationship and gave another example where she had smashed his false teeth.
So we've got glasses and teeth.
Yes.
All right.
She apparently did that, she said, because he'd smacked one of their daughters, but he denied that he'd done that. I don't know. Yeah. It all sounds very volatile.
Well, it's certainly not a healthy relationship.
Well, and also that's not uncommon, is it, for someone who has been in a toxic relationship? It does sometimes become a pattern, like they may get out of a toxic relationship and then enter another.
They might
similar.
feel comfortable. A level of comfort, being...
Is it like learned behavior? I don't know.
It could be. I'm not entirely sure. But, you do see matters where they go from one relationship to the next, whether it's a male or a female or a male and a male. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But that trend does happen.
Yes. Anyway, so at this point, the judge said, it is clear that she engaged in spiteful, vindictive, and vengeful behavior when she felt, whether with or without justification, that she had been slighted by her partner.
Well, I'd like to know what the definition of slighted is. Everything's not proportional.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Yeah.
So then we get to the victim.
Okay.
So she met and started a relationship with John Price in 1994. She's a serial relationship person. There's very little time. With someone. Yeah, very little time between the breakups and the new relationship starting. So they lived together for about 2 years, then they broke up, and then they reconciled and lived together again. So that was around 95 or 96. They had a relationship that was described as less than stable. So there was, violence from both.
Right.
And Knight engaged in acts of spite against Price, one of which resulted in him losing his job. She'd taken some photos of some things he'd brought home from work without permission. And when he upset her one time, she sent that to his employer and he got fired as a result.
Wow. So he takes Post-its from work.
I don't know what he took. It was something
work related.
Yes.
So
yeah.
not for his house, and he took it home. All right. All right.
And on one occasion, she did slice his left chest with a knife, and it left a scar, and that becomes important.
Okay.
Now, it gets more serious because during the time she was with him, she made it clear to numerous people that she intended to kill or seriously maim him. She made these threats to different people. She made these threats to Price in front of other people. And he had expressed concern for his safety and even for his life.
And they just did what? Nothing?
Nothing.
Well, that's awesome.
And he said he wanted to end the relationship and get her out of the house, but he didn't know how to do that. She had also been quite persistent in wanting Price to give her his house or at least a share of it. And he had made it very clear that that was never going to happen. He was going to leave his property and assets to his children.
Right.
And witnesses heard her say, "You'll never get me out of this house. I'll do you in first."
I mean, I don't know this case, but I have some significant concerns with people being told of potentially future acts and them just brushing it under the rug.
But do you think that is a product of the time? Like, back then, domestic violence was a private matter.
Yeah, it was taboo. It happened in the bedroom type deal.
Yeah, you didn't get involved. It wasn't your business.
Yeah.
But
I think times have changed
I hope so.
Yeah, me too, because certainly it's an aggravating feature for somebody not to render some sort of assistance.
Right.
When there's multiple accounts of somebody that says they're going to do something, we need to do something about it.
That's right.
As a
We
society.
can't just say that's a personal matter. Now, on the Sunday before the killing, there was an incident where Knight and Price had a fight. He assaulted her.
Okay.
And she then apparently went to get a butcher's knife. So he hightailed it out of there and went to a friend's place. He told the friend about it. He said he was scared. He actually called the police and he told them what had happened. And they talked to Knight, but she said she'd never had a knife. She had no intention of getting a knife and that he'd assaulted her. He said he wanted to get her out of the house and the police told him he'd have to use the proper court processes to achieve that. And kind of left it at that, even though he had repeated he was very scared of her.
Yeah, and I think, the time frame comes into this as well because police nowadays know if an incident's happened, and back 25 years ago, I'm not sure the technology would be the same.
No, and I think, again, they probably saw a domestic dispute.
Yes.
And
we'll just let them cool down, and
that's right.
They'll be back at it tomorrow.
So over the next few days, she showed everyone the bruises of the assault. There were some minor bruises on her breast and I think a bruise on her arm. She even went to a doctor and the doctor gave a statement that said she didn't seem upset by the injuries, but it was clear she wanted them on the record. And so this was a factor the courts looked at.
So she wanted them on the record. Okay.
Played into an argument of premeditation.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So John Price himself, or Pricey, was a popular local figure. This offence took place in Aberdeen in New South Wales.
Okay.
Oh, gosh, I hope it's New South Wales.
No, I think it is New South Wales.
Yes, New South Wales. He was known for being a top bloke with a charming and down-to-earth demeanour. He was likeable, generous, kind, would always be the first to lend a helping hand to someone in need, notwithstanding he was at times violent to Catherine.
Yes.
He had 2 children from an earlier marriage, which had ended in an amicable separation. His wife said to police that he had never been violent with her, even after he'd been drinking. and they had separated only because they weren't really compatible anymore. So that was a vote of confidence as to the type of partner he was.
Right.
At the start of their relationship, it had apparently Knights and Prices. It had apparently all been going well. They did enjoy a little honeymoon period, apparently a very vigorous sex life. But obviously it all started to break down.
And in a big way.
In the worst way. So here we go with the murder.
Okay.
Okay. Brace yourself.
Yes.
So the offence occurred either very late on the night of February 29, 2000,
Okay.
or 1st of March.
Right.
So
a period of time.
They didn't know for sure the exact time of death, I don't think. He had been stabbed multiple times. His death was as a result of multiple injuries to various organs of his body, secondary to multiple stab wounds. The autopsy showed that he had been stabbed at least 37 times, but probably more because they weren't able to tell exactly because of what else she did to him after the stabbing.
All right. You would think 38 times would be enough.
He had lost a massive amount of blood, and I think that was essentially the cause of death,
right,
the massive blood
yes.
loss. So it appears that Price had been lying in bed when he was first attacked. The first wounds were on his front,
okay.
and he must have had enough ability to get up because he did apparently try and escape. He'd made it into the hallway. He got to the front door. There was blood on the door handle and on the outside door handle. So the theory was that he even made it outside, but then was dragged back into the hallway. He'd been stabbed in the back as well, probably while she was chasing him. And then I think he was left to die in the hallway. There was a massive pool of blood
there would
found. But she wasn't done yet.
Okay.
After he was dead, she dragged him from the hallway into the lounge room.
Okay.
Now, this is where it becomes important to remember she was proficient with her knife skills from working in the abattoir.
Yes.
And so she skinned Price's body.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And she skinned it in one continuous act. So his entire body was skinned in one piece.
So that would take, I don't know anything about that, but that would take some technique.
I'm glad you said you don't know anything about that, but it would.
Yeah.
And
it would be a conscious decision based off of previous experience.
So it said, incredibly, it was done so expertly that during the autopsy, the medical examiner was able to put the skin back on.
Half his job was done for him.
To see where the stab wounds were and that sort of thing through the punctured skin.
Unreal.
Isn't that phenomenal?
That is. Especially like when you're going through that emotion and the volatility of just having stabbed someone and the adrenaline, and then you're just...
But so I think this is part of the reason she is our worst female murderer, because I don't think it could have been in the heat of passion or rage. This is deliberate, calculated, patient to get all of that done. But she's still not finished.
Okay.
So she gets the skin off. Then she decapitated him.
Okay.
And sliced the flesh off his buttocks. So she took the head and the slices of flesh into the kitchen, where she peeled and prepped some vegetables. And she put the head in a big pot with some vegetables and started to cook like a stew. She put the buttock slices,
like a rump roast,
into the oven with some more prepped vegetables. Once they were cooked, she got them out and put them on 2 separate plates and wrote a little note to each of Price's children.
To the children?
Correct.
Do we know what the note says?
We don't know what the note says, but it was for
out.
them to partake of this meal. And then she hung up the skin. It was hanging in the lounge room. And then she took some prescription tablets and went to sleep.
So the kids obviously weren't at home.
They weren't at
thank
home.
goodness.
But so that's the extent of her depravity.
This is crazy. This is something out of
A movie.
yeah.
Yes. So obviously Pricey didn't go to work, and because of what had happened earlier in the week, his boss was actually concerned when he didn't turn up to work, and so he made a call.
Right.
And so police went to the house, and they I do feel for them because it was apparently
That would have
shocking.
been a terrible scene for starters, and then to find out what was on the stove.
Yes. So the boss had called police. The neighbour had also noticed Price's car still in the driveway at about 6 a.m. So he was concerned. And so at about 8:10, 2 officers arrived. The front door was locked. They walked around the side of the house and actually broke in through the back door. And what they saw has been described as one of the worst scenes in Australian criminal history. Another officer who was called to the scene, Robert Wells, recalled that the sight will forever be imprinted in his memory. He said, "By the time I got to the scene, Catherine was leaving in an ambulance. She had taken some pills, not enough to kill her, but they made her sleepy. I walked inside and saw the human skin pelt hanging up, completely intact in one piece. John Price's decapitated and skinned body was lying on the floor in the lounge room. In all my years on the force, I've never once been called to a scene where a woman was violently beating up on a man. Most of the time, from my experience, it is men being violent towards their female partners. Catherine Knight was a very unique case." This disbelief that a woman could do this, I think it's disbelief that any human could do this to any human. It shouldn't really be a factor that she was a woman.
Exactly. And I think, police these days are becoming attuned to that fact that it can be either a male or a female. You can't just typecast, all right, this is, definitely the male did it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, she did participate in a record of interview because she'd taken some pills, but they were prescription pills. It turns out she was aware of their impact and what a good dosage would be. So
Right.
It was not accepted as a genuine suicide attempt or anything
Oh,
like
okay.
that.
So it wasn't the case. Right.
No.
Okay.
I think she tried to make it look like that.
Absolutely.
But she was never going to die from that intake. And so she participated in a record of interview. She said she'd taken the pills, but she said she could not remember anything about that night. Nothing.
Yeah.
The last thing she remembered was going out to dinner with her kids.
Why would you need to go out for dinner if you plan on making dinner? Can I say that?
Well, I guess you can. All right. So when the judge was sentencing her, he recounted the Crown case that this was premeditated.
Yes.
So the basis was comments made by her to other persons indicating such an intention and comments of a similar kind made by her to Price in the presence of others. So some of those examples were, "I told him if he took me back this time, it was to the death. Also, I'm going to kill Pricey and I'm going to get away with it. I'll get away with it because I'll make out I'm mad." And the last one was, "I am going to kill Pricey and the 2 kids too." So thank God the children went home.
Yeah, absolutely.
They also relied on comments made by Price to others, which indicated his fears for his life. So that thing that had happened on the Sunday before. He also said she had, when he went to magistrate's court after that Sunday altercation to try and get an order for her to get kicked out, he told the magistrate that she had previously stabbed him and threatened to cut his penis off. The conduct of the prisoner of night leading up to the murder, so getting those bruises recorded and telling everybody that he had assaulted her.
It reeks of a sense of planning and preparation on how to deal with it after the fact.
Yeah. She also strangely had gone to her sister's house the day before or close to the day of the offence and got in a video camera and recorded this really loving message to her children and said something like, "I love all of my children and I hope to see them again."
Okay.
And then organised this dinner with the kids, which was very unusual. And in fact, her oldest daughter thought there was something off about her on that night and said to her, I hope you're not going to kill Pricey and yourself.
Wow.
So there were definite signs. She'd also made sure to leave her 2 younger children with that eldest child, even though she hadn't, packed school clothes or anything like that. So there was definitely a degree of planning there. And so the judge said, I accept it was premeditated.
Okay, good.
Rejected the idea of a genuine attempt to end her own life, even though her counsel put that forward. And then the judge looked at her prognosis or diagnosis from all of the medical evidence.
From the self-reporting?
From the self-reporting. Okay. So all of the doctors were in agreement that she probably suffered from a borderline personality disorder. There was no psychiatric disease that any of them identified with her. And each of them, even her own expert evidence, said that probably that was just her nature.
Yeah, I mean, there was a pattern of it from the first relationship.
Yes, okay. That's right.
Yeah.
And so we know when it comes to a defense based on mental illness, it has to be that your mental illness or disease has deprived you of that capacity to know or understand or control what you're doing. And so even though she had this possible borderline personality disorder, which Australian courts are reluctant to accept as a mental illness, it was irrelevant because her violent, vengeful nature was inherent and wasn't impacted necessarily by that diagnosis.
Yeah.
So there was no acceptance that she had any kind of mitigation on that basis.
No, I mean, the mitigation she'd be looking at would be she pled guilty.
So
that's about it.
Yes, well, you would think so. So she did plead guilty.
Yeah.
But the judge said he took that plea into account.
Yeah.
But in light of the nature of the offence, he chose not to give any discount to the sentence on that basis, which is an entitlement of a court.
Discretion is important.
And I can remember there is one case I teach my students where a plea of guilt had no impact, and it was for a serial sex offender who had 114 different victims. And the judge said, I accept that you've pleaded guilty. I note it for the record, but I'm not going to provide any discount. And he appealed on that basis. And the court said, well, it's up to the judge.
Sure, there is discretion. I mean, if you look at it, though, then what's the point of pleading guilty, right? Run it to trial, inflict more pain and suffering on others, and you're going to end up with the same sentence.
But if it's such a heinous crime with such overwhelming evidence, then what value really is that plea?
Yeah, well, to get a discount.
Yeah, well.
A potential discount,
anyway,
at least in some courts.
So that factor in mitigation wasn't taken. The personality disorder was not taken into account. There was clear premeditation, cunning, all of that sort of thing. The other thing that her counsel put forward was that she had no criminal history at all. And the judge said,
good for her.
I note that you have no criminal history. However, this case is, beyond horrific. And so that is of less importance. And also you have a relevant history of violence that has been put forward and accepted in court.
Yeah, and that becomes really important in these matters. I mean, the technology, the databases these days, the communication between law enforcement agencies, it's huge.
Yeah. The last thing that the defense counsel said was that there should be consideration of mercy for Catherine Knight as a factor in mitigation. And the judge said, no, I have decided that the prisoner showed no mercy whatsoever to Mr. Price and that indeed she enjoyed what she did to him. Furthermore, mercy is normally extended to those who confess their wrongdoing and genuinely express their contrition and remorse for what they have done. And he said he didn't feel that there was any need for mercy to be a factor here.
Yeah, I mean, she couldn't remember when she, I believe, had the record of interview.
Yep.
And she took not enough, but just enough to
and
have
also,
an ambulance.
her narrative in every story she told her doctors was that she was the victim,
Yes.
when
And we know that's not the case.
clearly she was an aggressor. So the sentencing judge said the only appropriate penalty for the prisoner is life imprisonment. So that was his first determination.
Yes.
Because New South Wales, it's not mandatory life, it's maximum of life for murder. And then said also, because of the nature of the crime, parole should never be considered for her. The prisoner should never be released.
That's a fascinating sentence. And I say that only because in Canada, that sentence in and of itself would be deemed unconstitutional. The parole portion, yes. Without the possibility of parole portion would be.
You cannot order that?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can get 25 to life, but you'll have an opportunity for parole. That doesn't mean you're going to be granted.
No, but okay.
Yeah.
So obviously they appealed.
Yes.
She was the first woman to be sentenced in that way, to never be released. And so they had 5 grounds of appeal. I'll tell you, one was on the basis that she should not have her case distinguished from ordinary domestic murder.
No, I don't accept that. Sorry.
I don't accept that either.
No.
So the Court of Appeal rejected that.
Thank you.
Very clearly.
Thank you, Court of Appeal.
They also said it was an error to find she was so dangerous she could never be released. And they looked at that and they said, well, there's no requirement the judge be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt. But nevertheless, there was more than sufficient evidence for the judge to make that determination.
Well, not only that, though, but she has a need to be in a relationship after the fact. If she were to be released, where is she going to go? She's going to go to another relationship.
Yep.
And then what's going to happen?
That's right. It was an error to fail to see her personality disorder as a mitigating factor.
Yeah.
They looked at all of that and rejected that argument.
Good.
They said it was an error not to give weight to the lack of criminal history. And they said, no.
That's such a minor.
Well, and the judge noted that she had no criminal history. Yeah. So he took it into account and then said, however.
Yeah.
And again, that's within their discretion. And then the last one was that life was a manifestly excessive sentence. And they rejected that as well.
What type of message to the community are we supposed to send when somebody skins, bastes, and then tries to cover up?
Like the mind of the person to even conceive of doing that should not be out in the community.
No.
So, I mean, and that's the case. So she is still in prison.
Thankfully.
Silverwater Prison. She's now 69, and there's been no change to her order to never be released. So she will, I imagine, die in prison.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but that's probably where she belongs.
Yeah.
I've never been to a cannibal type scenario. Yes, murder, but nothing quite like this before.
No, and I would think very few people actually have, because it's not a common crime like that extent.
No.
I did wonder about her children, because I read what I could that was available, and nowhere, thank God, was there mention of her children. But imagine their lives,
Oh, they'd be ruined.
And obviously Price's children and family, that's normal, the victim of the crime. But for her children to have to also live with the knowledge that this was their mother.
Well, not only that, though, but the image that comes to my mind is the plate with the notes for them.
They were his children.
Oh, okay.
For his children.
For his children. All right.
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
But this is a crazy story.
Yeah. So I thought I'd finish, as I like to do, a little bit of extra facts, and not statistics, but some numbers. So life imprisonment without parole is our most severe punishment since we abolished the death penalty in the 70s.
Okay.
A report I read said that there are less than 15 of the approximate 1,019 prisoners currently serving life sentences in Australia who have had that penalty imposed on them. Interestingly, the ABS and the Australian Institute of Criminology do not keep records relating to the number of prisoners currently serving life without the possibility of parole. I found a little soundbite from convicted bank robber John Killick, who is actually one of Joe's favourites.
All right.
So he has spent time in prison with notorious serial killers and rapists, and he said the possibility of release was an important element in giving the prisoners a reason to behave behind bars. You don't have to let them out, but you have to give them hope, he said.
Interesting.
And I guess there is some truth there. Like if you know for sure you're never getting out, why would you comply in prison? I suppose so you don't get put in isolation or whatever they call it, segregation.
I'm not sure.
So, there are others that we've talked about who are serving life without possibility of parole. Ivan Milat is one. Seth Gonzalez, who we just recently did an episode on, and he was only 20 when he was given that sentence.
See, and I think that's part of why the Supreme Court of Canada has a problem with that type of sentence, is if somebody that is 20 that commits such a horrible crime, the age becomes a factor.
It does. Another one was Martin Bryant, who was the Port Arthur gunman, and Ivan Milat. So quite a few that we've covered on the podcast have that penalty. The last thing that I found about this was this article that was written, and it raised one little last thing I wanted to think about, but there was a academic who did a comparison or an analysis of the judgment. And so both at the sentence and then at the Court of Appeal, the judges made reference to this film that apparently Catherine Knight was obsessed with. So
she was a movie buff.
Macabre and violent movie buff. And it was this movie called Resurrection. The blurb for the film says, "Warning, most mind-blowingly shocking film you will see this year," and was rated R18+ with medium level violence. Now, the problem was that the things that Catherine Knight did to John Price seemed to have been copied.
So we've got a sequel.
Well, this was a guy who had a whole lot of different victims because he was trying to make a whole body.
Right.
From,
all right. Far out.
And so they talked about that and said that the sentencing judge said simply watching horror films is an indicator of Knight's disturbed nature. And this academic took issue with that because she was a horror film buff herself.
Okay.
But it does pose that question, like, do we need to be more careful about the representations? Like, I know horror movies and murder movies and, all of it, but I sometimes watch even like police shows and I think, we're teaching people how to get away with crimes.
We are.
But I think that idea of her taking inspiration from that film, I think that probably happens with criminal minds more than we would like to think.
It probably does. I mean, you get this spark in the head, thinking, hey, maybe I can do that.
Yeah. And I guess that's where all of these efforts to try and control what our kids are seeing becomes so important. So that at least when they're watching these things, they've got a fully matured mind and they'll be less impressionable. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was the story of Catherine Knight.
Unbelievable.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So hopefully that satisfies those listeners who were wanting to hear about her. I'm happy she's going to be locked up forever.
Oh, me too. I think it also reinforces some reoccurring themes involved in relationships that we'll probably touch on again.
Yeah. And I think a good reminder that domestic violence is not a gendered crime.
No, it isn't.
Perpetrators from both sexes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jay.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review the podcast. If you're interested in clips, check out @Justice Matters Pod on TikTok and Instagram.